everyone. I'm Nyaruri Bwokenye, teacher by profession for the last 10 years. Having studied English literature, I love teaching English. I want to welcome you this morning to this lesson. I'm teaching poetry, and as you all know, poetry covers in the current curriculum from right from grade 7, grade 8, up if you go to high school from Form 1, Form 2, up to Form 4. So I want to welcome learners and parents of learners who are in grade 7, grade 8, Form 1, Form 2, up to Form 4 to join me in this lesson so that we can discuss poetry together. I want to start by saying that, poetry is not a difficult area as many people think. Actually, it's one of the best areas in a language. If you get time and discuss poetry and research on poetry, you will be mesmerized how easy this area is in a language. So the first thing here is to learn what is poetry, what is poetry and some of the terms used in poetry. So if I might start with the first one, poetry, if I may say what is poetry. Now, there is poetry as poetry, if you allow me right, poetry is the art of creating poems. The art of creating poems. That is poetry. The art of creating poems. So understand that poetry is an art, and this is an art of creating poems or writing poems. I am using the word writing and creating because sometimes poems do not need to be written, because we have what we call oral poetry. We have poems which are created without necessarily having to be written. And that's why I'm using the word creating poems. Now, what is a poem? If I may go to the second point, what is poem? Terms used in poetry. The first one is poem. What is a poem? Now, a poem is work of art. Work of art. Poem is work of art written in verse form. Work of art written in verse form, using distinct styles. Using distinct styles in which the expression of feelings, emotions, and ideas is given prominence. Allow me repeat. I'm saying that a poem is work of art written or created in verse form, and in which using distinct styles, and in which expression of emotions, feelings, and ideas is given prominence. So when we write a poem because we want to express some feelings, we want to express some emotions, we want to express some ideas, and that is the main reason as to why somebody will take a pen and write a poem. So who is a poet now? Who is a poet? Now we have defined poetry, we have defined a poem. So who is a poet? A poet is a person or is the composer or the author of a poem. If I may repeat, a poet is the composer or a writer of a poem. Now, after understanding who a poet is, of course, a female poet is called a poetess. That one is common knowledge, and you need to know that a female poet is called a poetess. And after understanding who a poet is, now you need to understand that a poet is different from a persona. So who is a persona in poetry? A persona is this character that is being created by a poet. So as the poet is writing a poem, he is creating a persona. And the persona now becomes the speaker in a poem. If you may allow me to repeat, boys and girls, I've said a poet writes a poem. And as the poet writes a poem, in writing the poem, is creating a persona. So a persona is this person or this character that is being created by a poet to become the speaker in a poem. So in short, a persona is the speaker in a poem. Please, if you are asked a question concerning a poet and a persona, make sure you differentiate between a poet and a persona. That a poet is the composer or writer of a poem, but a persona is the character being created by the poet to become the speaker in a poem. We also need to define stanza. What is a stanza? Because a poem, once we make lines, we don't call them sentences, we call them lines. These lines form a stanza. So what is a stanza in poetry? A stanza in poetry is a group of lines created in a distinct way, and they are interrelated to bring out a message. A group of lines created in a distinct way, interrelated to bring out a message, and that is what we call a stanza. So a poem can be a one stanza poem, a poem can be a two stanza poem, it can be a three stanza poem, it can be a five stanza poem, etc., etc. Now, we speak about the subject matter in a poem. What is the subject matter in a poem? The subject matter is what the poem is about. The subject matter is what the poem is all about. Now, is what a poem is all about. But in the subject matter, if you are asked to state the subject matter in a poem, kindly make sure you state what the poem is all about by giving a brief explanation. By giving a brief explanation of the events in a poem. Let me give you an example. If you are asked about the subject matter of a poem, you can say, this poem is about the suffering of the street children, especially in towns. So when you are giving such an explanation, then you are giving the subject matter of a poem. By giving by stating what the poem is all about, and you go further ahead and give a brief explanation of the events in a poem. Then you have given the subject matter of a poem. Now, what is the theme? You need to be very careful so that you are in a position to differentiate between the theme and the subject matter. I have said, and if I may repeat, I have said the subject matter is what the poem is all about, and in giving the subject matter, you must go an extra step of giving a brief summary of what the poem is all about by explaining in a sentence. An example of a subject matter in a poem is, this poem is about a man who fell in love with a lady who was not ready to reciprocate. This poem is about a man who fell in love with a lady who was not ready to reciprocate. That is the subject matter in a poem. But what is the theme of the poem? Theme in poetry, a theme of the poem is given usually using one or two words. So the theme of a poem can be environmental degradation, or it can be the plight of teachers, it can be the plight of doctors, it can be the plight of housewives. So the subject matter, the theme here is given in one word or two words, and it's just like the title of the poem. After reading the poem, after listening to a poem, and you are able to identify one word or two words that can summarize that poem, then that one becomes the theme of the poem. Of course, what the poem is all about. Many stanzas in that poem, what they have been able to bring out becomes the theme of the poem. Boys and girls, if you may allow me now, you may allow me, I can now go to styles used in poetry. Styles used in poetry. As a poet, you see, it is called a poem because of these styles. If the poet does not use these styles, then he will not be writing a poem. So we now go to styles used in poetry. Now, styles used in poetry, they are classified into three. They are classified into three. The first one here, we have what we call the sound patterns. The sound patterns as the first classification of styles used in poetry. After sound patterns, we have another one which we call the sound devices. The sound devices. And we have the third one, which we call other styles now, that are not sound devices, that are not sound patterns, and they are called other styles. So I want to repeat that there are three, the styles in poetry are classified into three. One, we have the sound patterns. Two, we have the sound devices. And three, we have what we call other styles now. If you may allow me to start with the sound patterns in poetry. Which are these styles that I called the sound patterns? So in poetry, sound patterns are four. In poetry, sound patterns are four. In poetry, boys and girls, sound patterns are four. And when I'm teaching my learners, and because I'm teaching you, I always use a mnemonic or a short formula which will help you to memorize them, to remember them for long. So I always tell my learners, as I'm telling you this morning, that you can say, all assistants consoled Rebecca. All assistants consoled Rebecca. You can repeat that statement, you can write it somewhere, that all assistants consoled, from the word console, Rebecca. So if you say all assistants consoled Rebecca, now all will stand for alliteration. So the word all, in that mnemonic, in that sentence, mnemonic, the word all will stand for alliteration as the first sound pattern. So we have alliteration, and the word assistance will stand for assonance. Assonance as the second sound pattern in poetry. All assistants consoled. Now the word consoled will stand for the word consonance. Consonance. And then the last one, Rebecca, will stand for rhyme. So if I may repeat very fast, all assistants consoled Rebecca as the mnemonic. And this mnemonic, I've said all for alliteration. I have said assistants for assonance. I have said consoled for consonance. And I'm saying Rebecca for rhyme. And those four are now the sound patterns we have in poetry. Maybe I can say something shortly about them. What is alliteration? What is alliteration? Alliteration is the repetition of the consonant sound at the beginning of words in a short interval in a line. That alliteration is the repetition of a consonant sound. Actually, sometimes I call it caliteration. Why I call it caliteration is to know that this C I've added at the beginning of alliteration, C will stand for consonant, and then there's the word alliteration. So alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words in short intervals within a line in a poem. And then if I can say something shortly about assonance, that assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds in words, of course, in short intervals in a line. And I sometimes call assonance myself farsonance. Farsonance. Why I call it farsonance is because the V that I've added at the beginning of the word assonance to make the word farsonance will help me to know that assonance is repetition of vowel sounds. I have said, if I add the word V in the word assonance, I will form the word farsonance. Why am I forming the word farsonance from the word assonance? Is the V I have added at the beginning of the word assonance will help me to know that assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds at the vowel sounds in short intervals in a line. So that is the second sound pattern. The third one is consonance. Now, consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds at the end of words in a line. A line is formed by some words. And once you see the poet has repeated a certain consonant sound at the end of the words, he is trying to bring about what we call consonance. So consonance, boys and girls, is the repetition of a consonant sound at the ending of words in short intervals in a line. Boys and girls, I have said that consonance is the repetition of a consonant sound, of course the same consonant sound, at the ending of words in a line. Now we go to rhyme, and rhyme is the third sound pattern in poetry, and rhyme is the repetition of similar sounds at the end of words in different lines in a stanza. I've said rhyme is the repetition of similar sounds at the end of words in different lines in a stanza. So you find line 1 of the stanza is ending with a certain sound. Line 2, the word there is ending with a certain sound. Line 3, in that stanza, the word is ending with a certain sound. If these sounds are the same, for example, it is sound S. The second line, the word ending is ending with sound S. Then we have what you call, we use A. We use A to show that this is sound S. If the second line is still the same sound, we use another A. If the third one is a different sound, we use B. If the fourth one is a different one, we use C. So if you find it is A, B, C, D, then your rhyme scheme in a poem will be irregular. But if it is A, B, depending on the ending of words in a line, if they end in the same way, that they can easily create a regular rhyme scheme. So in rhyme scheme, we have two rhyme schemes. Either it is a regular rhyme scheme or an irregular rhyme scheme. I might not discuss this one into details because we have other the sound devices and the other styles we need to discuss. So allow me go to the sound devices now. But before I go to sound devices, I want to make it clear that there are 4 sound patterns in poetry. They are styles, but they are called sound patterns. And I've given you a mnemonic to remember. O assistance consoled Rebecca, where O stands for alliteration, assistance stands for assonance, consoled stands for consonance, and then Rebecca stands for rhyme. If you can write that sentence, it can help you to remember those sound patterns. Now, allow me go to sound devices. There are mainly two sound devices in poetry. Other scholars argue that there are more than two, but there's nothing wrong knowing that there are mainly two sound devices in poetry, and the first sound device is onomatopoeia. Some of you may say it's an onomatopoeia, depending on who taught you nursery, but the best you can look it up in the dictionary. You know, we look it up in the dictionary. You can look it up in the dictionary. Onomatopoeia is the first sound device. Boys and girls, sound device. And the second sound device is ideophone. So we have two main sound devices, boys and girls. The first sound device is onomatopoeia. The second sound device is ideophone. In a case where you are given us a question asking you to give more than two sound devices, then you are allowed to bring in the sound patterns as sound devices. So which formula can help you to remember these sound devices? Very simple. From the formula I had given you early, you say, "Or assistants consoled Rebecca," now add this. "Or assistants consoled Rebecca on id." I mean, id fiddle. From the word id fiddle, you can add the word id there. Look at this one. "Or assistants consoled Rebecca on id." If you say "or assistants consoled Rebecca on id," then you are in a position to say this on id. On is onomatopoeia and the id is ideophone. But you have also included now the sound patterns as part of sound devices. So that sentence mnemonic will help you to remember all the sound devices that we have in poetry. Thank you, boys and girls. We now go to maybe I can say something. Before I go to the other styles in poetry, allow me give you the difference between onomatopoeia and ideophone. Onomatopoeia is when you use a word that is describing the sound that has been used in a poem by an object. For example, if I say, when I was walking in the forest, I heard the hissing of the snake. So if you say you heard the hissing of the snake, then the word hissing of the snake, that phrase hissing of the snake becomes onomatopoeia. So you are using the word hissing because that is the word we use to describe the sound which the snake produces. But if you don't want to use the word hissing and you go ahead and use the sound itself, then that is not onomatopoeia. Then that is ideophone. So if you say, "I heard him coming and he was walking pat." If you use the word pat, or "I was sleeping at night and I could hear the rain." Instead of using the word to describe the sound of the rain, you use pat as the drop of rain on the iron sheets, then that is ideophone. If you say, "I heard the screeching of," if you use the word screeching, then you are not using ideophone. You are using onomatopoeia. If you say, "The car started," instead of describing the sound the car produced when it was starting, or the engine of the car produced when it was starting, and you say "vroom," for example, you say "vroom," the car went. If you have used the word "vroom," that is not going to be onomatopoeia. That is going to be ideophone. So in short, ideophone is when you use the really sound that was produced by an object or by an animal. But onomatopoeia is when you use another word to describe the sound that was produced by an object or by an animal. And that is the simple difference between onomatopoeia and, of course, ideophone as the two sound devices we use in poetry. Now allow me take you to other styles that we have in poetry. we have quite a number of styles in poetry, and I think this is what convinces most of the learners when they're in school or when we're learning. You need to know, boys and girls, that as a learner, being orderly or being organized, it will help you to master these other styles used in poetry, and once you master them, then you will enjoy answering questions on poetry. So I like or I love using mnemonics, and allow me give you this mnemonic that is going to help us master or remember these other styles used in poetry. The mnemonic goes this way. You can write it, boys and girls. It says, Peter smiles mechanically. From the word mechanically. Peter smiles mechanically. Peter smiles mechanically. And so does Henry. Peter smiles mechanically. And so does Henry. Irondo. Peter smiles mechanically, and so does Henry Irondo of England. I am giving you time to write. Peter smiles mechanically, and so does Henry Irondo of England, and Oxen Parado of Australia or Austria. Let me repeat. Peter smiles mechanically. And so does Henry Irondo of England and Oxen Parado of Austria. That is a sentence, but I will tell you how that sentence is powerful. It's a mnemonic sentence that helps learners to memorize all these other styles used in poetry. Now, when you speak about Peter, what does Peter stand for? Peter stands for personification. So, boys and girls, other styles used in poetry, number one is personification. And if you write the mnemonic Peter smiles mechanically, from that mnemonic, then Peter stands for personification. Smiles stands for simile. Smiles stands for simile. Mechanically stands for metaphor. So I've said personification, Peter personification, smiles for simile, and then mechanically for metaphor. And then and so. And does not stand for anything but the word so there. And so does Henry. And so the word so there, so stands for symbolism. Symbolism as another style used in poetry. And then we have and so does Henry, whereby now Henry here stands for hyperbole. What some scholars or some people call hyperbole, but it's supposed to be hyperbole. If you look at it in your dictionary, you find that that word is hyperbole. So hyperbole, and then we have Irondo for irony. We have England for euphemism. We have Oxen for oxymoron. We have Parado for paradox. And then we have Australia for apostrophe. Yes, just like the apostrophe, the one we use to show possession, that word apostrophe, but this apostrophe as now a style of writing in poetry. If I can repeat quickly, I have said Peter smiles mechanically, and so does Henry Irondo of England and Oxen Parado of Austria. whereby I have said Peter stands for personification, smiles stands for simile, mechanically stands for metaphor, and so the word so there stands for symbolism. We have Henry there. We have Irondo. I've said Irondo stands for irony. We have England standing for euphemism. We have oxen for oxymoron, parado for paradox, and then Austria for apostrophe. Now, if I will, before I even state some of the confusing styles of writing, boys and girls, there's another formula which gives us now the final list of the common styles we use in poetry, whereby I say sadly, sarcastically, read or contrasting rhetorical questions. Sadly, sarcastically, read or contrasting rhetorical questions. If you can write that sentence, it will help you a lot to remember them. That's sadly, sarcastically, read or contrasting rhetorical questions. And the sari here will stand for satire. Sari will stand for satire. Sarcastically is sarcasm. And then read is for repetition as a style of writing. Repetition. And then we have all for allusion as a style of writing in poetry. Allusion. Allude. Allusion. And then we have contrasting for contrast. And then we have rhetorical questions standing for the rhetorical questions style of writing itself. So sari, sarcastically, read or contrasting rhetorical questions. And I believe with that, I have given you quite a number, not even quite a number, almost all the common styles any learner is supposed to know. I have given you all styles any learner who says he wants to do poetry question, to answer poetry questions is supposed to know. And I've given you more than 15 styles that you are supposed to know. In the interest of time, maybe I can define like 4 and then we call it a day. For today, the most important thing is I have given you the styles. You as a learner, you have your dictionary at home, you have your phones at home, you can Google and find out what are these styles. You can also go to your dictionary, look them up, and you will be in a position to find them and write the meaning and even try to read a poem and see whether you can use them. But there are 3 styles that I'm interested in giving the difference. The first one is paradox. The difference between paradox and oxymoron. Now, oxymoron is a humorous statement that is always written or said in a poem. Remember, poems are either written or say or spoken or written or said, sorry. So oxymoron is a statement which has 2 words following each other that mean completely the opposite of one another. So oxymoron, an example of oxymoron is bittersweet. That something is bittersweet. I mean, look at that. Look at those words, bitter and sweet together. Or saying deafening silence. Deafening silence. There's no way silence can deafen somebody. So, but we say deafening silence. Or you say, you say an ignorant professor. You see, in this case, we expect a professor to be somebody who is very knowledgeable and somebody who can share knowledge. But if you say an ignorant professor or you say a drunk bishop, you see, we expect a bishop to be a role model, people who are guiding others. But you say a drunk bishop, there's something you mean here. It is completely opposite of what is required. So these words are completely opposite of one another and they become oxymoron. So what about paradox? Where I said of parado. So what about paradox? you need to know that paradox is not the same as oxymoron. If I can give an example of a paradox in a sentence, if somebody says, this is the beginning of an end, I want you to listen to that sentence clearly. This is the beginning of an end. You might get confused to know what that person means. This is the beginning of an end. So that's a paradox. If somebody says cheap things are expensive, that's a paradox. Cheap things are expensive. That is a clear paradox in a work of poetry or in any written work. Somebody can say, I can resist everything. I can resist everything but temptation. This person means he has already said he can resist everything, and then he said but temptation. That is a paradox. So paradox are more in a sentence. It is a completely opposite. The word which comes last seems to contrast what has already been said, but this paradox is always in a sentence. Unlike oxymoron, which are two English words, which mean completely opposite of each other, but they are used together. And I've given an example of an oxymoron, like bittersweet. I've given deafening silence, and many other two words which are used together, which are completely opposite of one another. Now, as I finish, allow me remind you of what I've just said in today's lesson. One, I have said that we have styles in poetry, and these styles in poetry are classified into 3, boys and girls. We have the sound devices. Yes, I'm giving a conclusion, a summary of my lesson. I'm saying I have taught and said that we have these styles used in poetry. They are classified into 3, boys and girls, whereby we have the sound patterns, the sound devices, and other general styles. Quickly, I have said the sound patterns are 4 in number: alliteration, assonance, consonance, and rhyme. Period. I have already said that apart from the sound patterns, we have the sound devices. And there are 2 main sound devices: idiophone, onomatopoeia. Idiophone, onomatopoeia. And I have said, because the other styles are quite many, I have given 2 sentence mnemonics that will help you as a learner and as a teacher to even make your learners remember them. And if I may repeat those 2 sentences, I said, Peter smiles mechanically, and so does Henry Irondo of England. Henry Irondo of England and Oxen Barado of Austria. That sentence itself will give you like 10 styles of writing in poetry. And then you add this other sentence which says, Sally sarcastically read all contrasting rhetorical questions. I've said Sally sarcastically read all contrasting rhetorical questions. Those 2 sentence mnemonics will help you a lot to understand or to remember all those styles we use in poetry. And it is always good as a learner to do your own research and find out how we use those styles and how best, what is the definition, and how best we can use them in a poem. With those very many discussions, I want to end my lesson there. I want to wish you a good happy Sabbath. And please, as a learner, you have got no option than to do research and to get to know more about poetry, because poetry, as you have seen, it is a simple and it's an easy area that you can enjoy answering questions, and you can even go ahead and become a poet. Thank you so much, and have a beautiful day. Thank you.